Yeah, just introduce myself very briefly. I've been dealing in African art and adornment for 25 odd years. I had galleries and various things like that, and I always like to define what you're dealing in, and that also applies to prestige objects, that long as the piece has been made for traditional use. So with prestige objects, there were many pieces that were made for prestige and tribal societies throughout Africa, right from Southern Africa to West Africa to East Africa to North Africa. Was a very important way of defining a person's importance and rank in the society and in the tribe. And then if you break that down, all sorts of different tribal groupings would have a different way of expressing themselves, depending on what was available, what they could get, I suppose, to make something. And it could be the variety could start from the nomadic cultures in East Africa, which a man of status would symbolise his rank by carrying a staff or a club or a shield or a headrest down that line. His wife or wife-to-be or whatever, more like wife or wives, she would be wearing an array of jewellery and beadwork, and the amount of beadwork and the amount of strands of beadwork and how layered that was and how rich it was would really define how important the husband was, how much wealth he had, because the more wealth he had, he would spend his money or his wealth on his cattle or on his wife. So she had plenty of adornment and jewellery, and that's really what prestige in that society would have been, a representation of the family wealth and the amount of cattle wealth. So those two items, because they didn't have cars, they didn't have big houses, they didn't have anything else like in our society, traditionally, normally. So each one could then be broken down, I suppose, but it's very, very simplistic to say that. But then you can have other cultures. So what I have was what I was going to talk about, was probably one of the most important pieces of prestige adornment in the Congo that came out into the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it was a belt adornment that comes from the Kuba culture. You can see it here. Now, a belt like this is extremely rare. And it's a girdle or a belt, and how it is worn. It comes from the Kuba culture in the Congo. It would have been dating back to, I would say, late 19th, early 20th century. They're extremely rare. I've only had two in my 25 odd years of dealing, so they're very hard to find. They are a representation of wealth and importance. The king would wear a belt like this on the outside of the wrappings that he would be wearing. So he would be adorned with all this cloth, this type of raffia cloth that's wrapped around him. And then this type of belt would then be fastened on the outside and worn as a display. And so it's like if he was wearing a crown, this is the representation of his wealth. What makes this one, in my eyes, even more special is that actually the size of the adornments that connects, which are actually very large. You have a different array of the early beads that would have been traded through to that area, cowrie shells. You have type of rare seashells that would have found their way into Central Africa, which would have been traded through the route. Charms that would have been empowered by the witch doctor to give the king more importance and power and strength, and they would have been wrapped up in some of these type of adornments, or not necessarily fetishes, but they were some sort of thing to give him more power and importance. So the Kuba had a very had a system of kingship. So they were one of the larger kingdoms as such in the Congo in centuries going back. And right up, of course, at the very, very top would have been the king, and he would have worn an adornment just like this.